right, so more fun here with Rudolf Steiner. Um, this is another one of his beautiful blackboard drawings. I'm not sure what it is, but it looks to me like how I think Steiner sees the planets. They are spiritual beings. They're living, they're alive, they're spiritual beings. And just as he says, we can't see each other's souls. When we're looking at a person, what we see is the collection of particles of them that they have accumulated to themselves over time. But those particles are always leaving. And I think every 7 or 8 years, you don't have any of the same particles in your body that you had 7 or 8 years ago. So what's the same? And Steiner says the soul is. The soul is the soul substance is what is keeping that individual together. And he says the same thing with the planets. The planets, as scientists present them to us, are outer physical shells that have undergone evolution and change. He says the moon has not always looked the way that it looks now today. There are soul spiritual beings there too on these planets. And so what I want to do, this is the second lecture in the series, also in volume 6, given 3 days later on January 28th, 1924, but in Zurich now. So the lecture is very similar, but it has some interesting clarifications that I think are worth thinking about. Here I want to make a correction. Last time I made a mistake because Steiner always confuses me about these two middle phases here of his 4 reincarnations of the solar system. Last time, this is the black and white model of the chalkboard drawing that we started with yesterday. That was the first image that moves from red to green to yellow to blue, and then begins with man, and then he adds the animal, then the plant, then the mineral. So there's a gradual moving downward of the hierarchy. Notice that. Man is the highest, the animal is the second highest, plant is the third highest, and the mineral kingdom is the lowest of all. So there's a gradual descent downward of the kingdoms. And the thing that confuses me about this is that, and notice too, the elements, as we said, red corresponds to the warmth of fire, and then we get, with the sun epoch we get air, and then with the moon epoch we get water, and then with the earth epoch we finally get solids. So there's a gradual process of densification that takes place. He adds, the confusing thing to me is that on the second one, the green one, he adds animal, but yet it's the etheric body, not the astral body. Yesterday I said it was the astral body that was constructed during the sun phase. It's the etheric body that's constructed by the angelic beings during the sun phase, the human etheric body. The animal gets added as the zodiac. So the zodiac is constructed as a realm of animal archetypes. And so I always get the two confused because animals have astral bodies, humans have all 4 of these, plants have etheric bodies. And so the moon phase is when now plants come in, and now the astral body also comes in. And so we get these weird, when Steiner is talking about his creation myth, these weird plant animal beings. They're like half animal, half plant. Very strange, very bizarre. Especially since these first 3 phases, red, green, and yellow, take place on the astral plane, not the physical plane. Only the earth plane is physical. And let's see, here's another clarification of it. This is someone else's version of him comparing it to the planets. But here again you see that the Saturn Eon, it says mineral body. It really shouldn't say mineral because mineral is the earth phase. But physical, yeah, the first, let's say, subtle physical bodies come into being, the human forms. And then with the sun epoch, there we get the etheric body. With the moon epoch, we get the astral body. And finally, with the earth epoch, we get the ego, but we also get solids. Everything solidifies during the earth epoch. And then we'll have these 3 future epochs, Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan, to come. So, and then here's one more version of it, another beautiful blackboard drawing that's another version of the same model that we looked at yesterday with the colors. And over here we can see Saturn, and then Sun, die Sonne, der Mond as the third, and here's the Earth phase at the fourth. And so these beings that come into being, that the angelic beings create, they're kind of like eggs of warmth. These are the sort of designs for the first human forms that appear during the Saturn phase. And then, of course, there'll be 4 or 5. We're in 4, then 5, 6, and 7, Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan. I love to see his blackboard drawings. They're absolute works of art. They have been collected into a couple of books, but they're expensive, but worth getting. All right, so let's take a look at this diagram here of the moon. The moon, so he goes back to this, in this lecture, he goes back to the idea of the opposition between the sun and the moon. And he says, only he makes a clarification here, where he says the sun is connected with our ego, the moon with our astral body. Yesterday he said the moon was connected with the intellect, and I found that difficult. Maybe it was a mistake of the stenographer or the whoever translated, because this now makes much better sense with astrology. The sun does indeed correspond to the ego in astrology, and the moon with the astral body, in the sense that the astral body is the seat of passions, desires, jealousies, anger, frustration. All that has to do with the astral body, and that has to do with the moon in astrology. So then he says, so he goes back to talking about the moon beings, as he calls them. The moon is the portal for incarnation down onto this earth. That is the portal that we travel through. And he says the moon beings keep track of our karma. Each individual's karma, he calls them here metaphorically books. But they're not books, they're not even physical. This is the spiritual version of the moon, and the moon beings living on the spiritual plane of the moon, is that they keep track of the individual's karma, and then they inscribe that karma from the previous life into the individual's astral body. And not the head, he says, into the actual astral body, not the ego. The ego has to do with the sun. And those inscriptions can code for illnesses, they can code for phobias, they can code for how well a person resists illness, how well a person, or how sick a person gets. They're very deep in the unconscious, he says. So they're very deep down in there. And then he says, then he goes, okay, so he goes back to this idea then that the moon has to do with the past, and it has to do with our karma, just as, again, in astrology, the north and south nodes of the moon do indeed have to do with karma, and the sun has to do with the future. And so he starts talking again about individuals meeting each other, and he says that the sun is the abode of the angels, of the angeloi, or at least one rank of the hierarchy. All the different planets correspond to different ranks. He's just using the generic term angeloi here for the sun, and he doesn't say what the moon beings are. He just calls them the moon beings in this particular lecture. And so the moon beings govern encounters between individuals, and so when, let's say, individual A meets individual B, they have both gone through the moon as a kind of portal that has brought them down here. And now once they get down here and they encounter each other, and the effect that they have on each other's wills is the key thing here. And then it becomes into the present time frame, where now at this point then the angeloi from the sun beings now intervene, and they take over, because now this has to do with the future interactions and possible future karmic lives of how these two guys, people, whoever, interact, couples, of course. There's this funny thing where he's talking about being at a tea party. He's like, imagine when you're at a tea party. If you're at a tea party and you're just talking to one person who really interests the shit out of you, and everyone else is background noise, you've got a karmic connection with that person right there. All the other relationships are superficial. But he says that, so the moon relationships are the deep karmic ones, but the sun has to do with a more shallow sense of encountering someone in a mental or an aesthetic sense. So it's shallower in that sense, but yet, for an initiate, and now for Steiner, an initiate is someone who's been initiated into the mysteries, into anthroposophy, ideally, but any of the great mysteries, is able to connect with beings that he or she encounters in a different way, because they can sort of see through them in a way with a kind of X-ray vision, and they can see their guardian angel. So each person has assigned to them from the sun a guardian angel. That is your presiding spirit, and that's what initiates can see when they are interacting with such individuals. And then so he says, I'll read this passage here where he says, an individual encountered for the first time enables us to see more deeply into the cosmos. It is a piece of good fortune to meet such a person, and recognition that this meeting enlarges our knowledge of the world must develop into fine sensitivity. This is a person who's an initiate meeting someone with no karmic connection. So an initiate has a certain obligation in connection with every individual with whom he has no karmic connection from the past, whom he encounters for the first time in the cosmos. He must link himself with the spiritual being belonging to the realm of the angeloi, who is the guardian spirit of this individual. He must become acquainted not only with the individual himself, but with his guardian angel as well. The guardian angel of this individual speaks unambiguously from within him. Hence, when an initiate encounters different human beings with whom he has no karmic bond, he hears a clear and definite speech. He hears what the angeloi of these individuals are saying. So, once you're initiated into the mysteries, it's a different experience. One ego is encountering another ego. And remember that the ego is the thing that comes in during the earth phase, in addition to solids, obviously, in the whole history of physical evolution. But the invention of the human ego, and the ego between an initiate and just a person that he has no karmic ties with, still involves a spiritual interrelationship, because everything for Steiner is spiritual, and all human relationships are spiritual, whether we're interacting karmically with a being or not. And yesterday we made this comment that about dreams, that another sure sign that you have a karmic relationship with someone is dreaming about him or her, because we meet all kinds of people that don't appear in our dreams. But he makes this interesting statement here where he says, there are also other indications of the existence of a karmic connection. We may meet an individual and then have a great deal to do with him, work with him, and so on, but we never dream about him. The reason is that the karmic connection is not with our astral body, but only with our ego. So in other words, it's not from the moon plane. The moon plane is connected with dreams and karma and reincarnation and the past, where the sun has to do with the future, and it has to do with the ego. Just as in astrology, your sun sign is your waking ego and your sense of yourself as a willing individual. You have plans, you want to make things happen, and the sun has to do with making those things happen, and the angel beings that are in connection with the sun are the beings that move your life along for you. So, as he says, he concludes here, sun activity combines with moon activity in our life. The light radiating to us from the moon is connected with our cosmic past, and the light of the sun is connected with our cosmic future. So this one was a short lecture because it was it's not a complete transcript. It says right at the beginning from an incomplete transcript. But I do think it's an interesting amplification of that first lecture. So we'll leave it there for that one.